The Tao of Self-Confidence, episode 931. Welcome to the Tao of Self-Confidence, where I share stories of amazing women who have discovered their inner journey to self-confidence. Visit our website at thetaoofselfconfidence.com. Your inner journey to self-confidence awaits. If you're tired of being the best-kept secret in your industry, listen up. You don't need to be louder, you need to be seen. Grab my free Visible Framework Toolkit, the exact steps I use to go from overlooked to being the go-to expert people turn to for impact and insight. Download it now at thetaoofselfconfidence.com. Well, hello, friend. Welcome to the Tao of Self-Confidence, where I share stories of amazing women who have discovered their inner journey to self-confidence. I'm your host, Sheena Yap-Chan, and today I have an amazing woman on the show today. She is the founder of Filipino BC. Super excited to have her on today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Kristina Corpin-Moser. Hi, Kristina. How are you today? Maybe you can fill in a little bit more about yourself to the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. How's it going, Sheena? It's great to be here with you today. I am the ED, the Executive Director and co-founder of Filipino BC. Prior to that, I had many lives in different sort of leadership roles in both the for-profit and nonprofit sector, kind of doing a bunch of different things. But yeah, for the last few years now, really been doing work with Filipino BC and the Filipino community.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. And can you share your cultural background with us?
Yeah, so I'm like a multi-hyphenated, ethnically hyphenated Canadian. So I'm Filipino, Austrian, and Jewish, and born and raised in Vancouver, Canada.
Thanks for sharing that. And Christina, what'd be your favorite self-confidence quote?
Yeah, this question, there's always I think people often say there's just so many quotes, but the one I like is by an author named Alexandra L. And she says, transitions, big or small, are rarely straightforward. They require abandoning the parts of ourselves that feel safe and familiar. It is a massive task to intentionally choose change over comfort, but it's taught me to trust myself more and embrace the shifts.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a great quote because we're going to go through so many transitions in our life, whether big or small. They're all just as important, and it's important to embrace it, right? Sometimes we fear that transition. We fear like change, pivots, all kinds of stuff, but they happen for a reason. It's part of our journey. And when we can learn from it, that's how we can move forward and have the confidence. So I really love that quote that you mentioned. And in your own words, how do you define self-confidence?
Yeah, I think there's many types of confidence, right? I'm sort of extroverted, so I've probably always had a little bit of an air of confidence, but now I would probably define it differently. I would say that now would say that confidence is sort of having the knowledge or assuredness enough in your ability with like a healthy dose of humility and curiosity.
I love that. I mean, confidence is about knowing our own capabilities, right? Without knowing those capabilities, we're not going to go out there and take action. And it's important to believe in ourselves. That's why a lot of people have a confidence gap because we're all capable, but how we see ourselves really stops us from moving forward because we might not believe in ourselves, outside forces, the words that people tell us that take effect in how capable we see ourselves. So I love that definition that you mentioned. And what was your life like before your discovery of self-confidence?
So I think like sometimes like ignorance is bliss, right? Like when you're not in certain rooms or you're not at certain tables, oftentimes that's done by design, but it's also like very effective, right? You can sort of be like told that like somebody better should be at that table, right? And I think, in some ways that's almost easier. Doing things I think is also like half the battle, right? Because it's as you do things and you learn and you find your ways, if you force your way to the table or you force your way into these spaces, that's sort of when you realize that oftentimes that you deserve to be there, or people at those tables don't know as much as you do, or you know as much as those people do, right? And so I think you'll have multiple moments of like building self-confidence over time. But yeah, when I think about before self-confidence or before, wherever I am today in my journey, right? Like, I think that, yeah, sometimes just not knowing where you've been left out is it's almost better than like realizing that like you've been, kept out of spaces where you've always belonged.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we think we might not be qualified because of maybe a position that seems so high, and then sometimes you see the person who's in charge, and I'm not knocking anybody down, but some of them are less qualified, right? But they were just confident enough to go for it or confident enough to search it. And especially in Asian culture, we're not taught to go after those positions. We're not taught to like, you need to find those leadership positions. You need to go out there and create something different. I mean, especially in Filipino culture, it's like have a stable job, be a nurse. Not that anything's wrong with that, but like, we're always taught this one path, not realizing there's so many different paths. And because we only know one path, we don't know there's other stuff out there. And, what was that point in your life when you realized you were more than enough to go out there and be who you are today, especially co-creating Filipino BC? I mean, creating a nonprofit is not a walk in the park. I think most people think, oh, you just get donations and you're fine. It's like, no, right? There's so many other things that happen. But yeah, what was that aha moment in your life?
Yeah, I think if you're doing it right, you probably have a few aha moments. And then self-confidence is sort of the culmination, of all of those aha moments. But I've had a few, I'd say in like recent memory, like, the very first Lapu Lapu Day, people really just like didn't think that it was going to be anything, right? And I remember the moment when I was standing on the stage looking at just like blocks and blocks of thousands of people. And people were even like nasty in their doubt of like whether it was going to be successful. I think when you have confidence in vision, and like I said, this comes with like, you have to know enough, right? To know when people who are doubting you may be ill-intentioned or just ignorant, right? And so, but then, planting those seeds of doubt, right? Like you still have to go out and do it, right? So when we stood on the stage in front of thousands of people, and it was such a massive success the first year, that was an aha moment for me for sure. And then I think another aha moment was, in response to, the tragedy that came after this year's event and really stepping into like a different kind of leadership that like tested my resolve in different ways. Like it's one thing, I think, to lead a team or an organization or just to lead in general. But I think this year in particular, right? There have been a lot of times that tested me as to whether I felt confident enough or whether we were doing the right thing or what could we have done better. And I've been really like privileged to have like a lot of leaders stand by me. And that's been like really like tremendous in terms of my growth. And I think it's built a different kind of self-confidence than I had before, right? A stronger assuredness in like my values and my principles and who I am as a person. And it tested my like resolve, right? And so, when I say there's like multiple times where you will build confidence, I would say sometimes struggles, you like kind of like accidentally stumble into your strengths. And so that this year has built a different type of confidence in me. And I think as we go through our journeys in life, you'll likely have many of those aha moments. But I would say those are like the two big ones for me.
Thanks for sharing that. No, it was really unfortunate what happened at the second event. Of course, it was something that nobody ever thought it would happen. And yes, there's things we can't control, right? And as a leader, you're like, what did I do wrong? What could I do better? How could I have prevented it? And sometimes you just can't, right? Like there's just things we can't control. And I know that's hard to say because in our culture, we want to control every single thing. And it's like sometimes we have to learn to let go. But I love that you mentioned you had a great support because a lot of people think as a leader, you do everything yourself when really there's a team behind it, you have a community behind it. You had a lot of support and being able to create a event like Lapu Lapu was so amazing to see, right? It wasn't just a festival for, yes, it was a festival for the Filipino community, but think of how many other different cultures came to that, right? Especially being in Canada, being very multicultural. I think it's great to see. Like, I remember last year I took my nephew to a Filipino festival in Toronto, and he was like, "Are Filipino people only allowed to come to Filipino events?" And I'm like, "No, everyone's invited." And that's like Filipino culture, right? We invite people for food, for fun, for a good time, and it's so great to see that. So great to see festivals that highlight our culture, that promote our culture, and that invites other cultures to learn more about us through our love of food. And because of that, what's your life been like now?
It's been a hard year, right? Personally and professionally, for sure. And it's also been a year that I've witnessed and seen the best and the worst of people, right? I think somebody said really early on in like the emergency response that they like didn't like someone from the Filipino community that they heard what Capwa was. So this like Filipino value of like shared humanity. Like they heard what it was or they've heard it around the Filipino community. They never like really understood what it was, but that in the moments afterwards, they felt what it was. And I think you saw this like outpouring of support and just people wanting to take care of other people and really the community lifting itself, others up. And also, it brought out the worst in people as well, right? But yeah, how's this year been? It's been tough, but I think from a confidence perspective, at least, it's forced me to be more vulnerable than I've ever had to be before. Like, and also I've had to be more self-assured than I've also ever had to be before. Like more principled and confident in those parts of like myself than ever before as well.
I love that you mention being vulnerable because vulnerability is always often seen as a weakness, especially for women, when vulnerability can be a strength. And being able to be confident enough to share your vulnerability, that's how we can relate with other people because we all have those vulnerable moments, right? We have good days, we have bad days. We meet good people, we meet bad people. But how we react to them, that's what matters the most. And being able to keep moving forward, even in a tragedy, I mean, that's confidence, right? Because you could have been like, we're never doing this again. Because to be honest, that was a very traumatic event, right? And not just for you, but for our community and for even Vancouver, right? And so you could have just said, we're not doing this ever again. But you said, no, we're going to keep moving forward. We're going to know better. We're going to learn. We're going to, tweak a couple things because we want this back, right? Look how many people came. Look how busy it was. Look at other cultures that came and enjoyed our food, our culture. And, it's sometimes it would be a disservice not to do it at times, right? So, like what you mentioned, the word kapwa, right? Like it's like the togetherness. It's so important, even now more than ever. So I love that you mentioned that. And if a woman's listening to your episode and she was in her own journey to self-confidence, what would be that one tip you'd give to her?
I think first, that always remember that you're enough. Right here today as you are, that you're enough. But the older, and then like asterisks, right? The older I get, your life is a journey of like self-discovery, becoming more self-aware and self-assured. And the more you learn about yourself, like the more you build confidence, right? And so it's like a lifelong process. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, right? I think I've always had like an air of self-confidence, but I also like didn't know what I didn't know. And over time I have a different kind of self-confidence because I've either done something enough times that like I know what works. I'm more open and vulnerable as like a leader because I know there's more than one right way to the right result. And then I also like am self-aware enough and self-assured enough in certain things that like you can't really shake my resolve in those things. While also, like I said, having a healthy sort of sense of humility and self-awareness to know when not to be confident. So yeah, that you're enough and that like it's a lifelong journey.
Thanks for sharing that. And if our listeners wanted to get to know a little bit more about you and what you do, check out the community, is there any links or social media profiles we can connect with?
Yep, you can find us at Filipino_BC on Instagram is probably the place to follow us. And then we're everywhere else as well. And then, you can check out our website, filipinobc.com. Probably just following us on social media. So we're on all your platforms is probably the best way to keep in touch.
Thanks for sharing that. And to our listeners, if you want to connect with Kristina, you can also head on over to thetowofselfconfidence.com and search for Kristina's name. Her show notes will pop up along with everything else that we talked about. And I really just want to thank Kristina today for taking the time to share her story, her journey. So thank you so much, Kristina.
Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. It was such an honor having you on the show. And to our listeners, be on the lookout for another new episode of another amazing woman's journey to self-confidence, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now. You can now purchase Bridging the Confidence Gap, How Empowered Women Change the World on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Indigo, and other book retailers sold worldwide. Get your copy today. Thank you for tuning in to another amazing episode of The Tao of Self-Confidence. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to get your daily boost of confidence.